Okay everyone, welcome to Life After Work. Solomon here. This will be a follow-up to my last video on the Carrack design and on this model that I have over here to my left. It's the one I'm calling the dust collector. Anyway, by the way, ignore the dollhouse behind me. It's a little project came in. A young lady's about to have a baby and this was her childhood dollhouse. It's kind of a mess and she wanted me to clean it up, so big stuff. I'm just gluing on things that she broke off 35 years ago. Anyway, just ignore that. This is about the fourth or fifth time that I've done this video. Each time I take it in and look at it and I just decide I've got to do it over. But one thing I've learned, if you do a video enough times, then you will, and you can't remember what it is you want to say, eventually you will at least remember what you don't want to say when you redo it. So here we go, let's get started. I've made notes so I won't forget anything and I'll get things in the right order. It's not script, it's just notes. I went on the internet. I wanted to find out what the dimensions of a Carrack were. Now you guys probably are you know, cringing at that thought, because if you go in and ask Google or whatever search engine you're using, what is the average size of a 14, 15, 1600s Carrack? Now you're going to get one of two responses. You're going to get 0, nothing could be found, or 10 million. Well, amazingly enough, I did get about a half a dozen different sources that gave the same information. Feel okay about using the dimensions that I found. Now what did they come to? Well, the prototype Carrack, and just for kicks and giggles, let's say it's Magellan's ship from the 1500s, because this is more like a 1500s style ship. Alright, so if you look at Magellan's ship, it was 75 feet stem to stern and 25 feet at the beam. Well, interestingly enough, the width is 1/3 of the length. Now that's fairly easy to remember. I looked up galleon just for kicks, because every picture I see of galleons or remade galleons or whatever, galleons look just like Carracks, except for the amount of weaponry on board. Well, as it turns out, according to one source, about the only big difference between a galleon and a Carrack is that particular ratio, width to length. Galleons are longer and narrower, not narrow, but narrower. So instead of 1/3, the width being 1/3 of the length, it's something else. I didn't bother to look up to see what that was, but that seems to be the primary difference. So it's okay if you're building a model and you think it's a Carrack, then you just want to make sure you get that proportion correct. Don't make it too long, don't make it too short. Basically, width is 1/3 of length. That said, if you take that 1 to 33 1/3, now how did I get to that? Well, 75 feet is 900 inches. You divide that by what this model has here is 27 inches from stem to stern. You divide the 900 inches by 27, you get exactly 33 1/3. So I'm going to call this a 1/3 scale Carrack based on the length alone. And I'm only going to use the length because I can't really stretch this or shrink it. So there we go. We've got it. Now if I take that 33 1/3 and I take a lot of pictures off the internet of Carracks and measure them just on the photos and compare them to the length, the main mass is just a little bit taller than the length of the ship. So I applied the 33 1/3 and some of this, and I came up with it should be about 78 feet tall on the prototype, which would make it about 28 inches on the dust collector. Again, just slightly taller than the ship is long, and that comes out pretty much with what I've got. Now I suspect those dimensions are pretty much all over the place, because I can't believe that every Carrack built for 300 years was the same length and width. But that's what we're going to go with. That makes it simple. 33 1/3. Anyway, So what do I really have? That's the question. What do I really have? The 27 inches is accurate. I measured it. It comes with a 33 1/3. That's how we calculated it. Now, if I do the calculation on what at 27 inches long, what should the width be at the beam, and the beam's the widest part, I'll put a picture up here that kind of shows a cutaway of the ship, and you can see how wide it is at the belly. Okay, that's the belly of the beast. That's the widest point in that bathtub. So that'll give you an idea. So at the beam, my model should be 9 inches wide, and the main mast should be 28 inches tall. Well, if I really do the measurements, I've got my 27 inches, but the width on the dust collector is only 5.5 inches. So I'm substantially too narrow. And the mast is 29 inches, and it should be 28. So that's not a problem. I can cut an inch off. I'll go ahead and figure out what the other masts are and the bowsprit and get all of that worked out, and then I'll see what I want to do. Now, a lot of the comments about what I should do with the hull were mixed. The most common was do whatever feels good. Do what's right. It's your model. And I appreciate that. A few of you came through and said, leave it alone. Stick with it as a rigging example. And I'm gonna tell you what I've arrived at doing, but first I'm going to show you this dust collector in detail. And in doing so, I'm going to show you the problems with it, and I'm going to also use it to teach some terminology, so if you're building a model, you know what you're talking about, and if something is missing, you'll know it should be there. Because what I'm going to show you that should be on this model literally was on every sailing vessel from Columbus Day all the way up to the early 1900s. It didn't really change. It got more complicated, may have more sails, may have more masts, but all of the components are the same. So I think it's important to go over what's not here and why I'm going to put them on, because just to do the rigging, I've got to add some things to it. So anyway, let's get started. And first of all, I'm going to start with some terminology. And the terminology is stem to stern. What is stem? What is stern? You know, I don't know how many of you, my father was Navy, so, you know, if we had to clean our bedroom, it was clean that bedroom up from stem to stern. Well, I knew what the stern of a ship was. Never was sure about the stem. Well, here's again, going to put it right up here. Maybe I should move over. There. I'll put it up there. Now, the yellow is the rectangle around the stem. The stem is the forward curved beam. It's a beam that comes up the bow of the ship. The stern, there is basically a stern board. Now that's all the way at the other end of this picture. That stern board goes from the keel all the way up. That's what the rudder is attached to. And then of course you've got the keel. That's the red part of this. It goes all the way the full length. Now that's the first thing they lay on a ship. Any ship, even today, you lay the keel. Well, nowadays they're doing compartmentalization a little differently. They're building ships in segments, welding them together, but each segment, the keel has to line up. The keel is the backbone of the vessel. And I'm convinced that one of the early builders of the carracks probably had a failure in the dry dock when they were building it. And he went home to dinner, and maybe Mama had picked a big old rack of lamb to cook that day. And after all the meat was gone and the bones were laying on the table, this guy looked down and he saw laying on its backbone with all of its ribs stuck up in the air. And he said, "Eureka," or "Aw shucks, why didn't I think of that?" That is basically how this thing is built. Every sailing vessel, and modern ships as well, they're built with ribs coming off the keel. So these three components, the stem, the stern, and the keel, are what all of these ribs come off of to form the ship. Now, how those ribs are formed determines the type of hull you're going to have. So I'm going to constantly keep coming back to stem, stern, and keel, most likely. Also, another one I'll throw in, you'll hear me use it a lot because I think it's important, is cutwater. The cutwater is that forwardmost point on the stem. I usually refer to it as that point at the waterline. That's where the bow cuts the water. Therefore, I call it a cutwater. And it doesn't matter what kind of ship you're talking about. The cutwater is basically formed as your primary component of your design, as built for speed and efficiency. So I'll use the term cutwater occasionally, not a lot, but you're going to hear stem, stern, and keel. Now, if we look at this particular model, I'm going to turn you around here to look at it. I want you to think about, let's start by thinking about the stem. Now I'm going to put a picture up here of a copy, a replication of Magellan's ship. I believe this was done by the Peruvians in honor of Magellan, because he was the first one who discovered the coast of Peru during his around the world travels. I'll put that picture up, but let me turn you around here and bring you in on the bow of the dust collector. Alright, this is the bow of the dust collector. As you can see, the cutwater is extremely narrow around here. The whole bow of this thing is very narrow. I said this was a 5.5 inch width, should be 9 inch. Obviously, if it came out on both sides about that far, you'd get more of that bathtub shape. And that bathtub shape stays most of the way till you get to the stem. Okay, now it does come up more and has more of a curve. So that whole bow is wrong, but it seems like everything on this is wrong. You know, for me to widen all of this would take a great deal of work. I'm not sure if it'd be worthwhile. And here's an idea. I'm thinking about it, and you know, if anybody thinks it's a mistake, let me know. I appreciate being told when I'm making a mistake. But if you look at this from the side view, I'll give you somewhat of a side view. I'm thinking about cutting it right here, all the way straight forward. Now that would be basically leaving the main deck and the forecastle and aft castle. All of this down here would be gone. The implication here would be that maybe it would get bigger. I don't know. And once I cut it, this is hollow, by the way. I've discerned that much about it. I might be able to put a couple of braces in here and just belly out some of this if there's nothing else holding it. I don't know. I thought I'd wait and see, but at least that would give an implication of what the rest of the vessel might look like. And I haven't decided if I want to cut it along this line or bring it down just a little bit, but I'll cut it straight so it will sit flat on a base. That takes the attention away from all this garbage down here. I call it garbage. It's just so wrong, it's pathetic. And again, look up here, somewhere up here. I'm not sure where I'll put it. Maybe up in this corner, or down in this, maybe down in this corner. Take a look at the picture of Magellan's replica ship that is to scale. I'll put the bow picture in. You can see how much it looks like that bathtub. And I'll also put the stern in, because that's the next big problem. Let's turn this around a little bit further. If you look at the way this was cut off here, there is no stern post. The stern post should come down here, and attached to the stern post should be the rudder, a big long rudder, not this little whatever that is. That wouldn't turn a rowboat. But if you look at the Magellan ship, which is kind of what this looks like if you really look at it, this should come on back. It should have a nice arc coming up, a keel post coming down, hooked in down here to what is the keel. So the stern post coming down, hitting the keel, and then reshaping that bow would fix things. But that's a lot of work, and quite frankly, I don't think it would be worthwhile. So that's why I'm thinking of cutting it. Maybe cut it right here. Maybe I'll just cut it right here, all the way back. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm looking at there. And if you look at, again, look at this picture. If you look at the picture that I'm going to put, that's the real boat, built to scale, 1-to-1 scale, off of plans and research from Portugal, built by the Peruvian shipbuilders, and they have done an excellent job with it. So there's a couple of those out there. I think it's the Victoria. At any rate, they all look the same, and this will never look that good. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm going to go with that. Another problem. I had shown you initially when I cut the rigging off this, let me zoom you in, that all of this rigging came from out at the end of the yard arms down to eye bolts screwed in along here. Well, that's not really where that goes. What should be out here are called chain plates. Now I'll put you some pictures up again of chain plates. And here's pictures of some chain plate. Literally are chains with an eye on one end that connect, and that's a dead eye. We'll discuss dead eye. That are tied to dead eyes for the shrouds that become part of the standing rigging for the ship. Well, I don't have any way to attach those, because those actually attach to a channel plate. Well, the channel is just a board. Here you go, some more pictures. It's just a board that goes, I'm going to say it goes aft of each one of the masts, because it's meant to be structural between the mast and the ship. And the furthest forward, for instance, for this mast, the furthest forward that channel board should go would be right here. And then for this mast would be back here, not up here. Be back here, because you don't want it too far back. And then here it would be back here. So I've got to add those on both sides. That's not a big deal. But the purpose of those is you run the chain plate through those boards. Those boards act as a spreader to spread your shrouds out and give them the maximum structural integrity for your mast. Remember, the wind should be blowing forward, and the stress on the mast would be forward. So you want to have the shrouds just aft of the mast to take up that stress. So I've got to add those channel rails in and the chain plate. Not a big problem. That works for me. I can do that. And that really isn't that much. It's just cutting a few pieces. Maybe, I don't know. Where did all that rigging, where was it supposed to go? The rigging that I cut off. Well, these ships have FIFE rails. And I know if you've ever watched an old movie with sailing vessels and pirates, you've seen the FIFE rail and didn't know what a FIFE rail was. That's actually where they put the belaying pins. Now, belay means to hold, okay? It just means to hold. So a belaying pin holds those lines. But it's for the running rigging, not for the standing rigging. The standing rigging is attached to the ship and is a structural member of that ship to hold the mast up. The running rigging has to be turned loose. It has to be adjusted. As wind changes, as you get slack in your sails, whatever, you've got to adjust the yards. So they go to belaying pins, and those are on FIFE rails on the inside of this rail. Also, they go, it basically, you've got one, it's called, I guess it's still called a FIFE rail. I don't know. I've seen them more often going around or in front of the masts, right at the base, so that your lines can go straight down and you handle them down here and you belay them right here around the base of the mast. Here's a picture. Well, I've shown you a couple of these I've shown you a couple of these channel boards. I've also shown you some FIFE rails, but let me give you some pictures. And one of these pictures, the one with the red around the inside of the gunnel, is a replica of his ship from, I think, the early 1800s. But you can see here they've got the FIFE rails all around forwardmost mast. So you'll see it on the inside gunnels of the bow. And then you've got the FIFE rail around the base of the mast. Here's another one. This is another replica sailing ship. Again, belaying pins in a FIFE rail around the base of a mast. I think I need to do that, and I think I need to have belaying pins. And they need to be located kind of where these deck guns are, but I'll work that out. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this ship's going to have deck guns, and if it does, it may not have these. Anyway, that's a problem that's got to be fixed. Not a serious one, but it's got to be fixed. Now, what else? Well, the anchor. Take a look at that anchor. Now, I think I'll turn you and zoom you in on that. The modeler did a pretty good job locating this opening that the anchor rope, and it would be a line, a piece of line on a ship this old, not a chain. It would go through about here, sometimes further forward. I've seen it all over the place on different models. But that's not an anchor. It's got 4 of these prongs on it. That's called a grappling hook, well, not an anchor. And I don't believe on anything I've seen with any of these replica ships or any of the drawings of the original ships, none of them had an anchor like this. Let me put up a picture, and I'll put it down here. This is an actual anchor, and the way it's tied on one of these replica ships. They literally bring it up here somewhere, and they tie it on. So when they drop anchor, they literally drop anchor. They cut it loose and it falls. And here's a little picture of an anchor being dropped. This one has a chain on it, but it's the type of anchor that was used in the good old days. Now, in the golden age of sail, the anchors were usually cast iron. It had a cast iron shank with 2 arms and 2 flukes. Basically, now again, this isn't an anchor, but it would be these pieces here that would be the flukes. The arms would be the piece that would go across this way. So take a look at this picture. This is a picture of an anchor, the first one with an iron shank and iron flukes, all of it iron. Well, that didn't happen until, I think it was sometime in the 19th century, that they became, you know, 1800s, they became all iron. This other one that I'm showing you on the side of the ship that's pulled up and tied right in this area right here, which again is the reason I'm not going to reuse these holes to hold the shrouds for this. It should be up here because this anchor should come up and tie right in here. By the way, in my reading, of course, there's certain details you never really think about until you're doing your research, but these ships didn't have one anchor. They typically had as many as 4 anchors. They may only drop 1 or drop 2 at a time, but they always had a couple of extras because you lose your anchors, which, you know, that just makes sense. And typically that wooden stock that would normally go across here. So anyway, that wooden stock, it'd be perpendicular to the flukes, and it consisted of 2 pieces of oak tapered toward each end and held together with iron hooks and tree nails. That's what allows the anchor to sit in a certain position on the bottom.